Hello, and welcome to episode number 17 of the Marriage Coach Podcast, where we are here to help you take your relationship from surviving to thriving. Today on the Marriage Coach Podcast, we will be discussing biblical boundaries with Karina Ferrara.
Here, I only had in 2002 in February, right after 9/11, I had like only $6,000, $8,000, which is not a lot of money. I had no job, knew not a soul out here, had no place to live, had my car shipped, and I that's how I ended up in California.
Wow.
So kind of following a dream, but I think the Lord put that dream on my heart when really there were a little bit of pains underneath that dream that kind of encouraged me to move and to follow that dream that I had when I was in high school. And so all along, this is his plan. So I called a friend, and Harry lived up in San Diego. I called a friend from high school and I said, "You'll never believe where I am." And I said, "I'm in LA. She says, "Oh, that's great." And she's from Georgia. She says, "Well, I'm in San Diego." And I said, "Where's that?" This is 20 years ago, and it really wasn't in the news. It was this little dot on the map, just a little military town. And so she said, "Come down for a weekend." So on the way down, I had my car shipped already. I was living in a hotel and I drove down, and the whole way down, I was just lit up, and I didn't know why, but I was on fire. It was great mood. But why should I be, right? So against all odds, I should have fear. I should be scared, right?
Mm-hmm.
None of that. It was completely the opposite. When I look back, I know it was God. So when I got here, God said, "You're meant to be here." And I was like, hogwash. Because I have nothing to go on. And this is where faith comes in. You just have to trust. And sure enough, several years thereafter, he blessed me. Things that fell in my lap that I had no experience in. Another way, God is blessing you and you're on the right path.
Yes.
I knew things that I shouldn't have known, but God provided that knowledge for me. Right. Later on, I learned the reason why this was happening is it's one of my spiritual gifts is a gift of knowledge and discernment. So nonetheless, I'm down here. All these gifts are happening to me. Mm-hmm. And that brought me closer to God. And then when I moved out here about 19 years ago, I found a church. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to make sure they were a church that didn't judge. Yes, where I came from, there was a lot of judgment that never, ever sat well with me. So I came out here where all nationalities went, from all backgrounds. And that I felt at home. And I knew that was home. And I told the church, "I don't know where you need me. I will work for free." And so, I'm living off my money, and I just worked for free until God led me into, fast forward where I am today. But God has a plan.
Your story reminds me of the Abraham story. Abraham was, God called Abraham out of his father's home into a land that I will show you. And initially, God didn't even tell Abraham where he was going. And I'm listening to your story. I mean, it lines up with the same thing. And it's just so amazing, when we're talking about purpose. It's like, okay, because especially growing up, and this is one thing I'm careful about, even with our children. Biblical says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it." But what happens is we train, but we control as well. Mm-hmm. And you have so many people. I mean, it's like my parents want me to go to this college. I go to this college. You go 4 years. You spend 4 years of your life. You go to this college. You're doing what your parents want you to do. You get this job your parents want you to get. Yeah. And then you come to find out like, man, I hate my life. And it's like, I really respect the fact that you made that decision at such a young age to do that. And that's very encouraging.
Maybe it's Southern or just my parents are both Italian. I don't know. And they love me, right? You have
Absolutely.
To, of course. So I didn't know what I wanted. My brother and I were late bloomers. I didn't know what I wanted to be until I was probably like 21. And so my dad said, "Great, I'll pay for your college because you're going to be poor." And I'm like, "Great." So great. So since you're paying for my college, I want to go to Dallas. And every effort that I tried to go to school outside of the boundaries of Georgia was not going to happen. The message was basically, you know, if you're going to go out of state, then I'm not going to pay. So I stayed. But see, that desire was in my heart. It had nothing to do about anything else other than just following that tug, not even knowing it was from God at 21. But my purpose was not to stay there. And I would encourage anyone in college or deciding on this decision path is really pray about it. When you seek God, he will answer, and he will open doors and close doors. So I ended up moving away anyways because it was God's will.
Yes.
And it was God's purpose. My parents wanted me there because they love me.
And you love your parents. I mean, it's like
I love my parents.
You know, as children, and that's the thing. I think that's where the big issue in the tug of war is, because, you know, it's like, man, I love my parents. I want my parents to be proud of me. I want to make mom proud. And if you're daddy's little girl, you want to make daddy proud. If you're a mama's boy, you want to make mama proud. I mean, those are the things. And we fight with this in our head. And it's like, I think, I mean, even speaking to the parents to say, you know what, our children love us and they want us to be proud and pleased with them. I mean, we have to really trust God and allow them to go down their own path.
What I think is interesting is what you said, or both of you have said it. You said my parents love me, and he said you love your parents. And the thing about it is, as parents, we have to. When he said the scripture tells us that we are to train up our children in the way they should go. It didn't say the way we want them to go.
That's good.
And for speaking as a parent, and we're going to get into it a little bit more later, but biblical boundaries and speaking as a parent, you have this idea. You mentioned it earlier. You have this idea for your children and what you want for them. And if you're not careful, we can go all the way to the left and we can cross our boundaries, and we could start to make it you must do what I want you to do, because that's something that you just share. You know, if you don't go to school within this sphere, boundaries, then I'm not gonna I'm not gonna pay. And you do that meaning well. So the parent doesn't do that with the intent on holding the kid captive, but you do it thinking that you're going to keep them close, you're going to keep them safe, or they need to stay here, or whatever ideas you have from your parents that the family's supposed to stay together. But we have to be careful that we are training our children up in the way they should go versus the way we want them to go. Because listening to you, all I hear is purpose and what God led you to. And you ending up in San Diego was where God wanted you to be. And it wasn't that, the mindset, I mean, I don't believe the mindset from parents is I'm going to keep you from reaching your purpose. It's just, I want to keep my child close. I want to keep my child safe. So when we're talking about boundaries, I think it's important for us as parents, light bulb moment, to know that we have to allow our children to, as they are growing and becoming adults, we have to allow them to set boundaries as well for what is good for them and what's not good for them.
Karina, let me ask you this question. How did you become interested in biblical boundaries?
I came to San Diego, so that church, it's called Maranatha Chapel. Give them a plug. Called Maranatha Chapel. And they had a class a long time ago, and it was for biblical boundaries. So I was still in that little tug a little bit of me being here and not there, and I was setting boundaries already, and I had been for years. I just didn't realize there was a word to it.
Right.
Even though prior I had read books on codependency, and I learned about boundaries through that, and read a book before I left on boundaries. Again, I was just in this mode where I was following a very strong tug. So when a friend of mine at church said, "Hey, let's go," I'm like, "Oh yeah, sure, let's go," after work. So we went. There were 50 people. They actually had a waiting list. In this church, and that's when I realized how it's so biblical. I felt like this weight just fall off my shoulders, because it had spoken to me for years. It was a part of the fiber of who I am, because I was the one standing up when in the South, maybe it's the South or maybe it's my family, I don't know, but you just, you don't do that. And so I realized that this was part of who I am, and it's okay, it's biblical. And then when the book ties to 300 Bible verses or something in the book to boundaries, I just felt this weight come off my shoulder. So that's when I became on fire about not only continuing my innate path of setting boundaries, but tying biblical verses to it. And I referred back to the Bible of how boundaries are biblical. So when I drew those boundaries, there was a reason for it, and it's okay to set boundaries. So I think that me being in that class has just furthered my purpose for helping people, because I've lived it for 30 years, if not more.
Wow.
I'm only 31.
So would you say that the class that was offered at the church, that was the spark of what led you to go deeper and study biblical boundaries?
Yes, and ministering to other girls, usually mainly women, not so much boys or men, but mainly women, because there are a lot of people in the class, and then it would be people at work, and then it would be a friend or a friend of a friend, and I would know where they were spiritually, and then I would know how much to tie it to 10 Bible verses or just one, because they all knew I was Christian. To make sure, because the whole purpose of this is to bring them closer to God. I know that's God's purpose. So how much I engage in a Bible verse in relation to boundaries, I had to gauge in each person individually. And I know that I impacted people's lives because they tell me to this day.
Wow, that is awesome. So you basically set boundaries in your life before you even knew there were biblical boundaries. A lot of children, if they made the decision you made, it wouldn't be called biblical boundaries. It would be called being rebellious.
Yeah,
so
disobedient.
It's a big difference between being rebellious. Then, I mean, a parent, especially the one that's real, that know Bible and know Bible better than their children, and start using verses like, honor thy father and the mother, your day will be so, I mean, and all these different things. So, I mean, I think this is really great, what you're doing, and, pushing biblical boundaries, taking the guilt from the child, or taking the guilt from people, to now they understand, like, you know what, mama, dad, I love you so much, but my purpose is not about you. You did your job. Your purpose was to have me. Your purpose was to bring me on this earth, but your purpose is not for my destiny. And, just really, that message and feeling okay will say, and even parents understanding to let their kids go and stop playing God and allow their children to serve God.
This is exciting. I mean, I'm very excited about everything that you're saying, and
this is good.
It's good. Like, for parents listening, it is important for us, because we always, when we talk about boundaries, whether we talk about biblical boundaries or anything, you think about adult relationships, or you think about maybe the romantic relationships you have, and we we want to set biblical boundaries in those as well. But how often do we think about that in regards to our children, and how we're guiding them, and what we could be keeping them from the purpose and destiny that God has for them? Because if you had not set the boundary to say, no, this is what I'm being called to do, or what I feel to do, then you would not have been going, you would not have ended up in California. You wouldn't have ended up taking the class. You would not have ended up on this podcast today, because you studying and now and learning more and more about biblical boundaries. You shared a little bit about your story and how you started sharing biblical boundaries, but that study has to continue in order for you to be able to pour that into others. So if you, as a parent, you would have never set that boundary, saying with family or with whoever, I'm going to do what I feel this pulling and this tug and my purpose for me to do. So I think it's important for us as parents to see that sometimes things that are happening with our children is not rebellion, or it's not disobedience, it's them chasing purpose. It's them
Yes,
going after
chasing
the
purpose.
purpose that God has for them. And that's exciting to me. That's opening the door in my mind to think about when you're, whether it's a niece, a nephew, whoever it is, whatever child you come in contact with, having that mindset that I have to allow them to even set boundaries with me so that they can fulfill their purpose. So that's amazing. It's awesome. So if you could, Karina, could you give the listeners some tips from your experience with setting biblical boundaries? Because from what you said, it sounds like you started this within your family, started with your family and close relationships. Yeah. You said you started setting biblical boundaries before you even knew that's what it was called. Could you give the Marriage Coach podcast listeners some tips and some ways that they could set biblical boundaries with family and in relationships, some way for them to start from your experience?
Yes. You approach it with 100% love. Even if you have to pray about it or meditate about it, you need to be calm, and you need to have goals written down for you. You don't have to bring them a piece of paper, but have goals written down, what you are expecting from this. So first is love. Second is to be calm. Third is to use I statements, because even though you might say it calmly and with love, if you still start it with you, then walls are going to go up. And the whole point of a boundary is to communicate because you want to save that relationship, not because you want to make it worse. So my next recommendation would be to put it on them first. So for example, let's say I want to approach someone about the way they've been behaving and the relationship is stormy. And I know that they have issues with me and I have issues with them. Well, you're married. A lot of times you can't just leave, right? You're married. Yeah. So what you want to do, your partner very well, is you want to make it about them first. So depending on their personality, if you feel that they might be very strong or they might get defensive quickly, what you want to do is say, again, I realize that I've done some things that have upset you. What are some things that you would like to see some changes in me? Are there any boundaries that you have with me? So that way they don't feel attacked. Yeah. So then after they tell you what they are, then you can schedule a time, because they're going to be like, what is a boundary, right? But then once you're sitting down, let them go first. Let them feel that they have that power first, because it's not about power. Even in the nicest way, some people are not open to it. So let them talk first, what a boundary with you, and then you can have your turn. So those are my tips that I've used. I didn't get them from anywhere, nothing online. This is my own experience. And it has worked. It puts the walls down. They're more open. And then you have a plan. There's a plan that you have where, okay, so here's what I'm going to do. And then you meet, whether in a month later. And then when you see them making a positive move in the direction that's healthy for the relationship, you recognize it and you thank them and say, I noticed that you did so-and-so, and I really appreciate that.
Wow. That's awesome. Right.
Always do everything in love, even if they're angry or bitter or whatever. Always show love, because you'll get that back.
Yes. That's it. We always say on the Marriage Coach podcast, what you put in is what you'll get out. Yeah. What you celebrate is what will get repeated. So when you fill everything up with love, it has nothing but love can come out. Karina, what would you say is on your quest to learning more about biblical boundaries? What would you say is the most interesting thing that you have come to know?
There are 10 laws of boundaries and biblical boundaries. And, I never really thought of it in a format like that. Also, there's a bunch of myths as well. But the laws of boundaries really help. Again, they tie in Bible verses into everyday life. The law of sowing and reaping is one. The law of respect. The law of one that I like is the law of evaluation.
Wow.
Just because someone screams, as Dr. Cloud says, just because someone screams doesn't mean something is wrong.
Yeah.
So evaluate it. So those are some ones that kind of stick out. I would say the law of exposure is good. I like that one.
That is good.
Life is better, living in the light, which is what that one talks about. And there's a Bible verse, of course, tied to that.
Yes.
Envy is a good one, because the law of envy, envy can never be fulfilled, but desire can.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So those are some of my favorites.
Why do you think it is difficult for people to set biblical boundaries?
From my own experiences, from people that I've helped, fear.
Wow.
But fear is not of the Lord. So, but fear is one. Guilt, resentment. They don't want to rock the boat. They feel that, they're the problem child if they do it. And they just, people don't want to rock the boat. So things are kind of status quo, and just really fear the end of the relationship too. They fear that if they say something, that it would be the end. And abandonment is actually one of the biggest fears, quoted by a psychiatrist, that a famous psychiatrist. Fear of abandonment is one of the world's biggest underlying fear. We don't realize it. So fear of abandonment as well.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. You said that, just thinking about, I guess one of the things that can help us with that why is being a God pleaser and not people pleaser.
Yes. I thought I just need to draw a boundary once. I will have to draw boundaries my whole life, with my friends, with my coworkers, with my child, with my neighbor.
Yes.
That
Absolutely.
It's different from when you a teenager to an adult to going into your 30s, into your 40s, into your 50s,
Retirement
60s, 70s.
age.
It's like you have to adjust the boundaries in every category. So it's like
our whole lives.
Absolutely. They're necessary. We have not learned that we should set boundaries. You talked about earlier, sometimes we're raised in a family or in a city or a culture, and we just go with it. Whatever everybody else does, we just go with it. But when you have that idea or that knowledge of knowing that if I don't set boundaries, I can't do what I need to do, or I can't be who I was really created to be. I can't be successful. I can't be happy. I can't live by my purpose. Then when you come into that knowledge and you begin to set boundaries, to know that it's not going to be a one-time thing is something that's important for us to know too, because when we're talking about boundaries in relationships, regardless if it's for a parent's relationship or a sibling relationship or a romantic relationship, you just said, and we know from reading and learning about boundaries ourselves, that you have to continue to reevaluate those boundaries. You have to continue to look at it, because who we were 5 years ago is not who we are today. And where the life was going there, we could, not that we're going in a completely different direction, but we're going further. So those boundaries have to be revisited. And I think that's important. It's not like thinking of it as you making a rule and you drawing your line in the sand and it's going to be this way forever, and no other compromise or no other collaboration is going to happen. It's going to always stay this way. That's important. And I think that's good for us to know. I did have a question. I was thinking about when the two of you were talking. Have you ever experienced a time when you attempted to set biblical boundaries with someone, or went to set biblical boundaries with someone and it went to the left?
Wow.
Yes. Yes, most definitely. I can speak from my own experience, and then I can tell you about where it didn't work. My own experience when I did it, the relationship was not meant to be. It didn't matter how I said it. You just don't tell this person what to do and what not to do. That's this person's personality. And I learned that. And we actually went to counseling, and that came up in counseling, that was a handicap of his, that if he hears any constructive criticism, he feels like a failure. So I can't do anything with that. I think I said, when you yell, this is just who I am. When you yell, I don't hear your words. I hear and I feel your energy. So if you want to say something, if you're yelling, you won't hear it. So if you say it not yelling, then it'll sink in. And even my child knows that about me. So that's how I'm wired. And I communicated that. And it didn't go well. Especially with my friend as well. She's super calm. She's drippy sweet. So I know she said it really, really sweet. But she said it to him, and he had already 1 foot out the door. So I think in that relationship, it wasn't meant to be. And they are both with different people today, and they are both with their dream partner. So you can't force things that are not meant to be. And I think, and it's okay. It's kind of like me leaving home. I wasn't very confident. I mean, I think on the outside maybe, but on the inside, I did not have the confidence to leave. So the fact that I did it and succeeded and was poured with blessings just confirms that it was of the Lord, and that God had his hand in it all along. If things aren't meant to be, we can't force it.
Absolutely. And that's exactly why I wanted to ask you that question, because I think that it's great for our marriage coach listeners to understand that, when you're I think of boundaries as somewhat of self-care, and you living out your purpose and doing what God has called for you to do, but you want to the boundaries is the lines for you to protect what comes into your space and how things work in your life. So with that being said, we have to understand that, we may have hundreds of times where we implement boundaries with loved ones, with family, with friends, with parents, romantic relationships, and it goes well, and we're able to move forward in the best way. But we also may encounter times when we attempt to set biblical boundaries with people and in relationships, and it just goes completely left. And I think it's important. What you said is the key. Sometimes those relationships were not meant to be. And we have to be okay with that as a human being, that mindset and not being able to set those biblical boundaries has caused people to be in toxic relationships year after year after year. It's caused them to emotionally and spiritually die. Their purpose dies. Their purpose dies because I got to do what makes you happy, even though that's not working for me or working for my purpose. I got to do what pleases mom, even though that's not working for me or working for my purpose. I got to do what dad says, or he won't pay my rent, or he won't pay for school, or whatever it is, even if that's not working for my purpose or for me or for my purpose. And you've said it over and over again on this call. And I think it's very important for all the listeners to walk away with that every time you are attempting to set biblical boundaries in your life, you have to be open to the fact that when it's dealing with people, because we're all outside of each other, it could go one way or the other. We hope, and the hope and our goal is for it to go well, and for us to restore the relationship, and for us to move forward in the best way possible. But we have to be prepared for that time when it goes completely left.
Right. And I want to speak to that dead spirit. Someone's been violated for so long. In the Bible, the Bible say he had a great friend named Lazarus, and Lazarus was dead. And I just want to speak to that spirit that of the individual that's been violated for so long. I want you to understand, and I want to do for you what Jesus did for Lazarus, and just say, Lazarus, rise up. Lazarus, get up. No matter what you feel, doesn't matter how long you've been in this situation, you can come out of it. You can come out of it. It's not the end of the world. I mean, you have Sean, you have Karina, who's basically, just poured, just all these things with the boundaries. And I just want you to listen to this. And I want you to rise up and walk.
Mm-hmm.
The tomb has already been pulled away.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to rise up and walk, even with your grave clothes on. I want you to rise up and walk. And what you will understand once you start walking, when you first start walking, things may be tight.
Mm-hmm.
When you first start walking, it may be difficult.
Yes.
But once you start the movement, those grave clothes will begin to tear off because you're moving your arms, you're moving your legs, and those grave clothes will loosen up and eventually fall off. When you first start, it's going to be difficult, but Lazarus, get up and walk.
Amen.
I love it.
Yes,
I do. It's I like I mentioned earlier, I know that God puts pain in our lives sometimes in order to redirect us.
Mm-hmm. You might have thought it was dead. He just spoke to your spirit to get up. And I want to encourage you that it's not too late. It's not too late. And what you just said is key. Pray, pray, pray. If you have prayer partners that are trusted, wise counsel, that you can go and ask them to pray with you, pray that God gives you the words, keeps you calm. The tips that you gave us help to apply those. And then also pray that, this person's heart is pliable and then let God do the work. And I think about Pharaoh a lot because God sent Moses to Pharaoh, but he also he is the one that hardened Pharaoh's heart. So that goes back to the other situation you said, if it's just not meant to be, it's not meant to be. But to give you the strength to say, I've been dealing with this for 20 years. I've been dealing with this for 30 years. I've been dealing with this for 15 years. And I haven't said anything and my spirit was dying. But today I'm getting up. And today I'm going after my purpose. Today, some people's like, oh, I wanted to be a nurse when I was growing up and I didn't do this because of this. Today that rises up in you. And I think that when you come to who you are and come to yourself and become free, when those grave clothes come off and you're loose and you're able to say, this is me, this is not me, this is okay with me, this is not okay, this will happen in my space, this will not happen in my space, we will have a conversation if you talk to me this way. We will not have a conversation if you talk to me this way. When you start to draw those lines and set those boundaries in relationships, I know that they will become better if the other person is willing to do the work, if they're respectful to your boundaries, and if not, then there's other decisions that need to be made. But at the same time, what you just said is profound, and it's important for the listeners to know. If it's something that you have never addressed and it's going to be a difficult conversation, ask God to prepare you for it, to give you the strength and to give you the ability to accept the outcome. Easy.
Light dispels darkness. So praying ahead of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Drowning the situation in God before you even get to it. Yep.
Yes. Yeah. And I feel like the preparation part's the hardest. Once you're ready and you set that boundary, you really need to be able, that person, they need to be able to accept the outcome. So my example, when I left home and I drew a boundary and I said, I can't live this way anymore. And if this continues, then I'm going to go. I know that God put that pain in my life because my purpose was to leave. And so that pain was there for that. So when 2 years came up, I was ready. I didn't let anyone know that I was really leaving. I had let nobody know because I wasn't strong enough. I didn't want anyone to talk me out of it. So I had to become strong within the Lord, but I still thought it was me. Mm-hmm. But I had to become ready to leave. And just so you know, the enemy will knock you down sometimes because he wants you to be on his side. Mm-hmm. So, for example, January came, and a friend of mine that I grew up with said, I will fly out with you to California. He's from Atlanta, lived in LA, and moved back. And he said, I'll fly out with you. And I said, great. I said, okay, I'm ready. And this was just to family friends. And I said, okay, January so-and-so is coming. I forget the date. And he's like, oh, yeah, I can't do it. But you know what? I still did it. I did it after 9/11. I did it after I had that, and I still did it because God knew. God knew. Been preparing. So being prepared and ready for any outcome. So the reality is, if we don't set a boundary, other people are going to set them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we're going to have people setting boundaries with us our whole life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a part of life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's really no fear in setting boundaries because it's a part of life. They've already had the confidence to set them with you. So now it's time for you to come on board and all y'all to come on board and to realize it's time for you to have your own boundary as well with love.
Absolutely.
Awesome. If someone wants to reach out to you, Karina, and what you're doing, where should they go?
I'm on Instagram and I am on Facebook. I have a website that's being built right now. So I will include that later on once it's finished.
Okay, awesome.
Sounds great. It was awesome talking to you again this morning.
You too.
And this is definitely something that we are excited about sharing with the Marriage Coach Podcast community, because we want all of our goal with the Marriage Coach Podcast is to help strengthen relationships, make marriages and relationships in general better. And we believe that people learning, or us learning to operate in biblical boundaries, helps with that, whether it's people setting boundaries with us or us setting boundaries with other individuals. It helps our relationships to be much better.
Thank you for having me on. This is such a gift. I to spread the word to as many people as possible. Thank you.
We want to thank Karina for joining us today on the Marriage Coach Podcast. And we want to thank you for listening. If you enjoyed what you heard on the Marriage Coach Podcast today, we invite you to subscribe and give us a big thumbs up. If you're listening on iTunes, we encourage you to subscribe and rate the podcast. That helps us get the word out. Please check out our Lead to Greatness podcast on iTunes and YouTube. Thank you for joining us today on the Marriage Coach Podcast. We look forward to hanging out with you again next week as we continue to help you take your relationship from surviving to thriving. Bye. See you next week.